Hello friends and family, bit of a speed burn today. I am back in the van. I'm in a space that's a little bit noisy. There's some people on the street to my right, there's some people on the street to my left, and oh, by the way, here in California we don't have any power. We haven't had power since last night, but you know what? When you're used to living in a van, it's really not that big of a deal. So the only emergency plan that you need to have in place as an individual to be completely responsible is a backup plan for how you would watch my YouTube channel if in fact, if and when you lose power. That is my only piece of advice, because if you have to go through the day without watching my channel, what's the purpose of living at that point? Also, just got done with a 3-mile run. That is the extent of my running. I run because I've mentioned before that the living in a van, oftentimes I don't get the kind of time I need to go cycling, for especially if I'm going to do a 4 or 5 hour ride. Doesn't happen that much. So running fits the van thing. Now, I've heard stories for years about this thing called the runner's high. I've yet to find that. I feel like I need to go back to sleep. My body hurts, I ran on pavement, my right calf, my left hip, my low back. Yeah, it sucks getting old, but hey, I was out there battling it out with the other moms and dads of the neighborhood. This film is a bit of a last-minute film. I actually switched up the agenda for the From the Van with Dan series because of being in the print facility at RPI in Seattle, which is Blurb's parent company, and I was in there and I actually watched the process of a book being made. And it's a absolutely incredible process that I mentioned in an earlier film that I pitched. I wanted to do a project in the field, finish it, follow it through from the time the file comes into the building as an electronic file till the time it leaves packaged up in physical form. I think it's fascinating. But as I was in there and talking to the facility folks and all the folks at RPI who were incredibly nice, it was not my first time there, but it's a really fun place to go. And it got me thinking about where we are in culture and society right now, especially in the age of COVID. So the past couple of years, obviously for everybody watching this podcast, have been, there was a little wrinkle thrown our way, if you will, to put it mildly, COVID. And this is not the normal end of year time frame. If you look at CNN, if you look at The Guardian, if you look at Fox News, if you look at whatever network that you prefer to look at, you will have noticed over the past weeks and months stories about transportation, stories about manufacturing, stories about raw materials, stories about shipping. And these are not stories of hope and happiness. These are stories of the major systems in the world are upset. They are not functioning correctly. I ordered a piece of equipment and was told it was scheduled to be unloaded on a container ship off of Long Beach 7 months from now. Everything in this van, for the most part, that I've got on this trip was back ordered. I had to wait months and months and months, and this goes back over a year. The situation has not only gotten better, I would classify it, me being an expert on all things, I would classify it as actually getting worse. I don't think we're even remotely close to coming out of the impacts of what COVID has had on shipping, raw materials, distribution, all that. So with that in mind, I started thinking about what I would have to change when it comes to my end of year bookmaking needs. Now, I look at the end of year differently than I do the rest of the year when it comes to my bookmaking. For whatever reason, I'm not saying that you have to look at it the same way, but for me, I always looked at the end of the year and felt differently about the end of the year than any other time, and rightly so. It's holiday season. Everyone's sort of taken their foot off the gas in some ways. And for the most part, people tend to be in a good mood. I have a grand total of 5 pieces of advice that I want to give you in regards to bookmaking at the end of the year. And some of this advice is aimed towards people who are new to the bookmaking process. And other pieces of advice are directed directly at the pros, because I was once a pro and I made both good decisions when it came to end of year bookmaking and I made bad decisions. So if I can keep you from making the same decisions, then hey, it's called progress maybe? Maybe that's called evolution. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. Point number 1, very, very important. If you take away one thing from this film, this is it, people. Whatever you are going to do it now. I mean today. Do not wait for Black Friday. Do not wait and think that you are going to get things on the same schedule and the same timeline that you would in a non-COVID year. I cannot stress this enough. If you are one of these people thinking you're going to make a book or magazine at the very, very last minute for a family member or whoever, or a job, and you think it's going to arrive at that time, just think of how many systems in place are being impacted. So my number one piece of advice is do not wait around. Secondarily, a sub point, let's go to File menu, drop down. First is whatever you're going to do it now. And then underneath that sub drop down in File menu is typically, if you're going to start making something now, the chances of making something good are better because you're giving yourself time. Rushed bookmakers typically don't make good books. Rushed bookmakers typically aren't happy bookmakers. Happy bookmakers make better books. That is my experience going back over 11 years watching people do this. Rushed, angry people don't make good books. And the thing is, you want to make something decent, right? Okay, that was point number one. Point number two, a lot of folks do book annuals of the year. They will take their entire annual take of imagery, story, travel, family, and try to make an annual. Personally, that sounds way too much. I've personally never done that, and I never will, because it is simply too much stuff to maintain, wrangle, edit, sequence, and make sense of. And I see people not make their deadline for end of year annual. Then we get into January and February and March, and they end up being, well, I'm still working on 2015. It's 2021, and man, if I could just get 2015 done, then I can start on 2016. And I'm like, you've got 5 years more of annuals you're trying to do. An annual book, even for a professional editor, an annual book is a nightmare to try to produce. So, and I've got my handy notes here. Have I mentioned how much I love my iPad, even though it's really old? The iPad is a strategic tool for me. It actually works. And it's lasted longer than 3 months. And yes, the battery's not perfect anymore, but whatever, it's old. I shouldn't say do not. Think about this as a suggestion. Instead of an annual, break it into chapters. Think about your life, think about your family in terms of chapters. I used to do books on individual family members. I did a book with my mom, I did a book on my nephew, I've done books on my nieces. I've got some hilarious pictures. All it takes is one great photograph of a family member. And I have one of my little niece with her shoes on backwards. She didn't know they were on the wrong feet, and she's also missing a bunch of teeth. And she's laughing maniacally on the porch of my mom's cabin. And I nailed this with a Hasselblad with a waist level finder on Tri-X. It is one of my all-time favorite images. I'm in California right now with my other nephew, with a nephew of mine, and I have pictures of him at his 5th birthday party. I have a sequence on one roll of film on the Hasselblad of he and his buddies, and I really want to do a film about this series of pictures. And I was thinking about it yesterday. His mother reminded me of those images. It's probably the single best series of images I ever made of a kid with my Hasselblad. And it's him and his buddies, and they're blowing out candles on a cupcake pyramid that has a Darth Vader candle at the top. It is an amazing series of pictures, even if I so say myself. That's all I need to do an entire book. I could do an entire book with a single photograph. And so if you think about that, it becomes a manageable size amount of content that you can then put into a book rather easily. And then again, forget about the annuals unless you are just absolutely diehard or you have a system in place that allows you to keep up with the year that you're actually on. Doing one of these is daunting. Thinking about going back to like 5 years in the past and trying to make sense of all that, I'm not good enough to do that. And I've made 240 books with Blurb. I'm not even remotely close to good enough to doing that. Point number 3, if you are a pro, there are 2 things that I would think about on this particular point. Number 1 is think about a new portfolio for January 1st. I always loved looking at January 1st as a target for redefining my work going out into the world. And I would have something prepped and ready so that when January 2nd came around, I could start dropping these in the mail and putting them out to people. Yes, I said mail, the US Postal or FedEx or UPS or however you want to deliver things. There is still in my mind nothing better, nothing that cuts through the noise more than something printed that comes in the mail. If you go into photo editors or art buyers' offices, you will often see these things tacked up on their cubicles or their wall of their office. There's a tendency for people not to want to throw away printed material, so they will keep it for a long time, and it sure beats the heck out of a thumb swipe on Instagram, regardless of what anyone tells you, because everybody feels like they're a captive audience, that they have to do these social networks. But when you're in private and you're talking with them, believe me, you're going to get a whole different story, which is kind of fun, kind of exciting, kind of fun. I see some cracks in the foundation. I have had 2 conversations on this trip to California that blew my mind. And hopefully at some point I will share what I learned, or at least partial things about what I've learned. Much of what I was talking about with people was sort of under an NDA kind of thing. But it's about some of the happenings and movements that are happening, aiming towards what the internet's going to look like in the future. And it's pretty interesting for people who create things. So that's all I'll say is positive. And the second thing that, for this point, if you're a pro, think about new portfolio for January 1st. The second part of that is, if you don't want to do a portfolio or you feel like you don't need one, then my advice to the pros is to make a personal book. Make a book that is not going to be judged by your peers. Make a book that is not your life and death on the line with your career and everyone looking at it, and you have to be famous and you have to sell copies and all the pressures that come with being a professional photographer. Anytime you put something out in the world, you're often judged, and judged harshly by your peers. And that's not fair. It's always been that way. It's an incredibly unfair process. The joke is, you could win a Pulitzer Prize on Monday, and then on Tuesday you're assigned to shoot Pet of the Week, and all your colleagues are like, oh, your Pet of the Week picture sucks. They've already forgotten what happened on Monday. They're jealous, and they're judging you by the last thing that went out. Consequently, I learned this the hard way. I was making professional books that really weren't having a lot of success. And then I made a personal book. It was 22 pages. There were 12 images. It was $4 book, and it exploded. And it took off, and it changed my life. And I was like, wait a minute, this is a personal book. It's not supposed to be professional. Why are professional people engaging with my personal book? And the problem in this whole equation was me, was my mindset, mired in the 1970s, because the people that educated me in photography came up in the 1970s, and I had adapted their ideology about what it meant to be a photographer, what a book was supposed to be, and they were wrong, and they were outdated, and I was dumb for playing along. And so in 2007, I accidentally made this book, and boom, it took off, and I was like, oh, there's freedom out there. I can do whatever I want. A lot of pros do not understand that. They do not understand the power of the ability to make a single copy of a book, which leads me to my next point. Point number 4, and again, this is towards the pros. If you are a pro, think about specificity. I love that word, specificity. When people ask me like some of my favorite words, phlegm, love that word. Specificity would be another. You can make an individual book for an individual specific person in your career. Let's say that you meet with an art buyer from a big ad agency, and they're holding the keys to a client, a customer that you want to be the primary photographer for, and you have a meeting with this art buyer or this art director. Why would you not come back and make a book specifically for them based on the conversation that you had? You can literally type their name in, and then when they open up this book, or even on the cover, it has their name on the cover or inside. We get lost in the tradition of publishing, thinking that we have to print as many copies as possible and sell books to people we don't know. That is a really difficult thing, a hurdle to get over. When making a single copy of a book with intense specificity can be far more powerful in our careers than selling 5,000 copies of a book to people that you don't know, who are going to put it on a shelf and never look at it again. So think about that. The last point, am I rambling? There's a potential here. I feel like there's potential here. Can you tell I had coffee? I had to make coffee in the van because there's no power, as I mentioned before. So I whipped out the old Coleman stove and the classic espresso pot, and I didn't skip a beat, people, because if you don't have a plan for coffee, you are hosed. And can you tell I had coffee? I have not had any food either. That's a problem. Okay, point number 5. This is going back to consumers, prosumers, and really anyone. Even pros, I think this is applicable to. Think about collaborating with your family on a book for the end of the year, because most of us, at least, I think even still during COVID, many of us are going to be around family members during the end of the year. And this is a blast. Collaborate with family. And the reason I'm telling you that is I am in the process of writing a book about my father. that is about 10 short stories about my father. It's called there's a title of the book which is called The Bird Hunter, which was my father's CB radio handle. For those of you old enough to know what a CB radio was, my father's handle was The Bird Hunter. And the subtitle of the book is The Fantastic Failings of My Father. And these are 10 stories of my dad's epic mistakes in life that ultimately turned out to be positive for our family. And they are hilarious. I think they're hilarious because I was there and they were happening to us. And it's a blast writing this. So I'm writing these, and each story's about 5,000 words. So I'm writing these things, and I happen to share one of them with my brother and my sister and my mom, because my father died in 2005. And my brother goes, "That's not what happened. This is what happened." And then my sister said the exact same thing. "Wait a minute, I was there too. That's not what happened. This is what happened." And then my mom had another version of the story. So everybody, we're all there. Like, one of these went down on a little country road in Indiana, a little 2-lane blacktop in the middle of the country. And the only people for miles around were the 5 members of my family. And we're all there, and 4 of us have completely different recollections of what happened and what went down and what was said. And it is a blast when you sit together and you converge on what that story actually was and putting that into print. But there's a follow-up thing I want to mention here. Keep it simple. Keep the design simple. This is not a book for public consumption. This is a book for humor and for family. Keep the design simple. Keep the material simple. Keep it inexpensive as you possibly can. But the most important part, and this applies to all these tips, the most important part is just get it printed. Get it in now, because there's no excuse if you get later into the year and someone says, "Oh, the shipping dates are going to get backed up and you're going to miss your holiday deadline." That's on us. We know with beyond the shadow of a doubt how impacted these major systems are, and it's up to us to get in front of this instead of complaining from behind it. So those are my tips right now. I've got to somehow take this film and make a 60-second version of it, and I need to do it like in the next 2 hours. I've got to get this thing edited, get it online, get it released, and do the second one, because then I've got stuff to do, man. I got appointments and meetings, and I'm gonna do some flexing in the mirror. Oh, sorry, got carried away there. I hope that was helpful. As you can tell, a friend called the other day and he said, "Milnor, I got a book problem. Now, the first thought I had was, Blurb messed up. Like he got a bad book or something. And he was like, no, it has nothing to do with that. He's like, "I just bought another book on Amazon for no good reason. I can't stop myself." And he goes, "You have a book problem too." And I go, "Yeah, in that sense, I absolutely have a book problem. And most of my friends have a book problem. There's a library in my van right there. We have book problems, and that is a great problem to have. So let's continue. Let's add to the problem by getting out in front, getting our books in the pipeline now, and then looking like straight up gangster genius by the end of the year."